In a struggling seaside town in the American South, a 23-year-old black woman fights to keep her family together. She discovers a frail, elderly dock worker begging for food, a man who once gave up everything for the foster son who abandoned him. She chooses to help him despite the whispers around her. But when that son returns as a powerful politician, a long-buried truth comes to light, sparking outrage across the entire town. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. The rust never stopped spreading in Millhaven. Amara Lewis wiped down the cracked counter for the third time that morning, her hands moving in automatic circles. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across empty vinyl booths that once seated shipyard workers grabbing breakfast before dawn shifts. Those days were gone. The shipyard's massive cranes stood like metal skeletons against gray sky, and only seagulls fighting over scraps broke the harbor's silence. "Order up," Jake called from behind the grill. At 62 he owned Miller's Diner, the last business hanging on in what used to be Millhaven's busy downtown. The coffee was bitter, eggs came from cartons, bacon always too crispy, but it remained the cheapest meal in town. Amara carried a plate to table 3, where Mrs. Henderson counted coins for the second time. The elderly woman's fingers shook as she arranged quarters and dimes. "$4.50, Mrs. Henderson," Amara said softly, knowing what came next. "I thought I had enough." Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked. "Maybe just toast." Amara glanced toward Jake, who pretended not to listen while scraping the grill. She'd seen this scene too often. Good people stretching dollars until the next Social Security check. Jake made this wrong. "Extra hash browns." Amara smiled, pushing the full plate closer. "His mistake. No extra charge." Mrs. Henderson's eyes welled up, but she nodded and began eating slowly. The door chimed as 15-year-old Zoe walked in, backpack slung over one shoulder, exhaustion written across her face. School had ended an hour ago, but Zoe always took the long way home through nicer neighborhoods where houses had fresh paint. Same exciting day in paradise. Zoe slumped into the corner booth. "Tips have been better," Amara lied, pocketing Mrs. Henderson's $1. "How was school?" "Guidance counselor says I need college applications." Funny part, Zoe's laugh held no humor. "She talks about reaching for dreams and not letting circumstances define me. Easy when you drive home to Harbor Hills." Amara felt familiar weight settle in her chest. Zoe was honor roll smart, scholarship smart. But being smart in Millhaven was like having a sports car with no gas. "We'll figure it out," Amara said. Words she'd repeated for 3 years since their grandmother died, leaving them with a mortgage worth more than the house. At 5 o'clock, Jake tallied receipts while Amara counted tips, $12.37. Not enough for the electric bill, but groceries if she was careful. Walking home past abandoned storefronts, Murphy's Hardware with broken windows, the boarded bank, the old theater with weeds through sidewalk cracks, each empty building marked another piece of Millhaven that died with the shipyard. On Seashell Street, houses grew smaller and paint more faded. The Lewis cottage sat third from the corner, blue with a sagging porch and chain-link fence. Inside, Zoe worked on homework at the kitchen table, water beside her notebook. They'd run out of juice 3 days ago. "What's for dinner?" Zoe asked without looking up. Amara surveyed the refrigerator, half a bread loaf, questionable eggs, leftover rice. She could make it work. She always did. "Fried rice, your favorite." "Everything's my favorite when we can only afford one way," Zoe muttered with affection. After dinner, Amara sat on porch steps watching sunset over the harbor. Water looked beautiful in evening light, gold and orange reflections hiding oil slicks beneath. With enough squinting, ignoring the rust-stained pier and listing boats, you could almost imagine Millhaven alive. An elderly black man shuffled past, moving deliberately like each step required planning. He wore clothes from too many washings, carrying a wooden box against his chest. His breathing was labored, each exhale a soft wheeze. He paused at her walkway, swaying slightly. For a moment, Amara thought he might fall, but he steadied against her fence post and continued toward the harbor. She'd never seen him before, unusual in a town where everyone knew everyone's business. Something about how he held that box, protective and desperate, reminded her of Mrs. Henderson counting coins. Like whatever was inside was all he had left. Henry Brooks had been walking 3 hours when his legs gave out. He sank onto broken concrete that once marked Pier 7's entrance, wooden box clutched to his chest, breathing in sharp gasps. The morning sun was hot, his faded work shirt soaked with sweat. 43 years he'd worked these docks, from 17 when he lied about his age to get hired, until they handed him a pink slip and thanks for his dedication. A seagull landed nearby, hoping for scraps. Henry almost laughed. Sorry, friend. Fresh out of everything. The bird flew toward the harbor where tourist boats occasionally dropped trash. Smart bird. It knew survival meant going where resources were. Henry had been sleeping rough 6 months, since his landlord made good on eviction threats. The shelter had a waiting list, and charity had never sat well with him. A man should pay his way, but pride was a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. His stomach cramped, reminding him breakfast had been half a stale donut from yesterday's dumpster diving. There was a diner back toward town, Miller's, he thought. He'd walked past several times, watched people eat hot food off real plates through windows. Maybe if he waited until closing, hung around back, someone might throw out something edible. Not dignified, but dignity was another luxury gone by the wayside. Henry pushed himself up, swaying until dizziness passed, then started the long walk back. Each step was effort, but he'd learned to break journeys into manageable pieces. That fire hydrant, that stop sign, that telephone pole. The wooden box under his arm grew heavier each block, but he couldn't put it down. Wouldn't. It was all he had left of the life he'd built. Photographs, newspaper clippings, documents and items worthless to anyone else but worth more than gold to him. A child's drawing of a boat, signed for Henry in careful 5-year-old handwriting. A high school graduation program, with one name highlighted yellow. A folded letter on expensive stationery beginning "Dear Henry" and ending "I couldn't have done any of this without you." 8 years old that letter. 8 years since he'd heard from Marcus. Marcus, who used to sit at Henry's kitchen table struggling through homework while Henry cooked dinner. Marcus, who'd been 12 and angry when the state placed him in Henry's care, another foster kid, bouncing through the system. Marcus, who'd pointed to Henry at college graduation and said, "That man saved my life." Marcus, now Congressman Marcus Williams, apparently too busy for the old man who raised him. By the time Henry reached Miller's diner, his vision swam and shirt was soaked. He leaned against the brick wall, trying to catch breath without making noise. Last thing he wanted was police reports about vagrant loitering. Through the window, he saw a young black woman wiping tables with patient efficiency. Her name tag said Amara. He watched her gently correct an elderly customer's bill when she came up short, pretending there'd been a mistake to save dignity. Kindness like that was rare anywhere, especially in places where people worried about their own problems. Henry walked to the restaurant's back, past the dumpster to a concrete step by the rear door. Hidden from the street by a tall fence, the step was just wide enough to sit without blocking the doorway. He settled carefully, joints protesting, and arranged the wooden box on his lap, then waited. Around 6, the back door opened and Amara emerged with a trash bag. She moved toward the dumpster without noticing him, then stopped short. "Oh, I didn't see you." She clutched the bag, startled but not frightened. "Are you okay?" Henry struggled to his feet, embarrassed. "I'm fine, miss. Just resting." "I'll move along." "No, wait." Amara set down the bag, taking in his thin frame, labored breathing, how he held the box like precious cargo. "When did you last eat?" "I'm not asking for handouts," Henry said quickly, pride flaring as his stomach growled audibly. "Just needed to sit." "I didn't say you were asking. I asked when you last ate." Henry met her eyes and saw no pity, no condescension, just genuine concern from one human to another. It had been long since anyone looked at him like that. Yesterday, maybe the day before. Amara nodded decisively and picked up the trash bag. "Wait here." She disappeared inside. Henry heard dishes clattering, a microwave humming. He should leave, didn't want her getting in trouble for giving away food. But his legs weren't cooperating, and the promise of a real meal was too tempting. 5 minutes later, Amara returned with a paper bag and large cup with a straw. "Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans," she said, offering the bag. And sweet tea. Jake made too much, would have gone to waste. Henry accepted the bag with shaking hands. The warmth nearly brought tears. I don't know how to thank you. Just eat before it gets cold. Are you staying somewhere safe tonight? I'll find a place, Henry said, not exactly a lie. He'd found places 6 months now, some safer than others. Amara studied his face, wanting to ask more but unsure if she should. What's your name? Henry. Henry Brooks. I'm Amara Lewis, and Henry, if you're hungry again, come back around closing time. We throw out too much food anyway. Amara couldn't stop thinking about Henry. 3 days passed since she'd given him leftover meatloaf, and each evening she looked toward the back door, hoping to see him on the concrete step. But he hadn't returned. The morning crowd at Miller's was lighter than usual, regulars nursing coffee, trying to make meals last. Mrs. Henderson counted exact change for coffee and toast. Mr. Garrett stared out the window with empty expression. Bobby Martinez told Jake about his latest job interview, the third this month, ending with "We'll be in touch." 27 years at the shipyard, Bobby said, stirring coffee with unnecessary force. Started right out of high school, worked up to supervisor. Now these kids in suits look at me like I'm a dinosaur because I don't know their computer programs. At 4 o'clock, Zoe appeared earlier than usual with trouble written on her face. We need to talk, Zoe said, sliding into the corner booth. What happened? Mrs. Patterson called me into her office. The guidance counselor, she wanted to discuss my college planning timeline. Amara's stomach tightened. What did you tell her? The truth that we can't afford application fees, much less tuition, that my sister works at a diner, and we barely keep lights on. Zoe's composure cracked. Know what she said? I was limiting myself with negative thinking, and there are always options for motivated students. Maybe there are scholarships. With what grades, Amara? Zoe's voice rose. I'm smart, but not scholarship smart, not overcome every obstacle and inspire everyone smart. Just regular smart, which isn't enough when you're poor. After Zoe left, Amara stepped outside feeling hollowed out. That's when she saw Henry across the street, leaning against a lamp post, wooden box pressed to his chest. He looked worse than 3 days ago, thinner, more unsteady. Amara grabbed a paper bag and packed leftovers. Soup sandwich, crackers, pie too old to serve but perfectly good. I brought you something, she said, crossing the street. You don't have to keep feeding me. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, and I'm Amara, remember? Henry accepted the bag with shaking hands. That's a pretty name. Where are you sleeping? Here and there. I manage. That's not what I asked. Henry met her eyes and made some internal decision. Under the old pier mostly. It's dry when it rains. Police don't bother anyone there. That's not safe. What if there's a storm? I've been taking care of myself 75 years, not ready to give up yet. Something in his tone made Amara look closer. Despite ragged clothes and obvious hunger, there was dignity in how he carried himself. Pride, the same stubborn pride she recognized in herself. What's in the box? Henry's grip tightened protectively. Just old things, nothing valuable, memories, something like that. Henry, would you like to come to dinner tomorrow? At my house, nothing fancy, just home cooking. Henry's eyes widened. I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition, my sister and I cook too much anyway. People might talk, a young black woman bringing home an old homeless man. Let them talk. I don't care what people think. That evening, cooking dinner, Amara found herself planning tomorrow's meal, chicken, vegetables, maybe dessert, if she was careful with budget. You're humming, Zoe observed. Am I? What's got you in such a good mood? I invited someone to dinner tomorrow. Someone who needs a home-cooked meal. Zoe's expression shifted to concern. Amara, please tell me you didn't invite some random guy over here. Not random, his name is Henry, he's elderly, and he's having a hard time. How hard? He's homeless, Zoe. Silence followed, heavy with implications. You invited a homeless man to our house. I invited a human being who needs help to our dinner table. That's not safe. We don't know anything about him. He's not dangerous, Zoe. He's just lost. Amara's voice softened. You should see how he holds this wooden box he carries. Like it contains everything important in his life. He reminds me of Grandpa. The comparison to their gentle grandfather seemed to give Zoe pause. What if neighbors see him? What if they think we're people who help others? Good, maybe that'll inspire them. At exactly 6 the next evening, soft knocking came at the front door. Henry stood on the porch, cleaner than she'd seen him. His hair was combed, clothes worn but washed, and he held wildflowers picked from roadside. "These are for you," he said, offering flowers with a shy smile. "To thank you for your kindness. They're beautiful, come in please." Henry stepped carefully across the threshold, taking in the small living room with mismatched furniture and family photos. "This is my sister Zoe. Zoe, this is Henry." Henry extended a weathered hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Zoe. Your sister is very special." Zoe shook his hand cautiously, expression softening at his formal politeness. "Nice to meet you too, Mr. Henry." "Just Henry is fine." As they gathered around the kitchen table, Henry looked surprised when Amara asked if he'd like to say grace. "I'd be honored." They bowed heads as Henry spoke with emotion rough voice. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for hands that prepared it, and for generous hearts that invited a stranger to share it. Help us remember we are all your children, and kindness is never wasted. Amen." During dinner, Henry regaled them with working day stories, ships built during storms, crews that became family, satisfaction from honest work. His eyes lit up talking, and Amara saw glimpses of who he'd been before life knocked him down. "You mentioned raising a child," Zoe said. "What happened to them?" Henry's expression grew careful. "Marcus, he's doing well. Very well, he's a congressman now." "A congressman? That's amazing. You must be so proud." "I am. He was just a boy when he came to live with me, 12 years old and angry at the world. Smart, determined, worked harder than any kid should have to." "Do you still keep in touch?" Amara asked gently. Henry was quiet, fork pushing green beans around his plate. "He's busy, important responsibilities. I don't want to be a burden." The careful way he said it told Amara everything. Marcus might be successful, but he'd forgotten the man who helped him get there. After dinner, as Amara served ice cream, Henry excused himself to use the bathroom. While he was gone, Zoe leaned across the table. "Okay, I was wrong. He's not dangerous. He's actually wonderful." "I told you so, but what are we going to do? We can't let him go back to sleeping under that pier." When Henry returned, Amara packed leftover chicken and cornbread for him to take. "You don't have to." "Yes I do. And Henry, you're welcome here any time." Henry's eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink away. "I haven't had an evening like this in very long. Thank you for reminding an old man what it feels like to be part of a family." Henry returned to Miller's diner the next evening. The dinner at Amara's had been the first time in months he'd felt truly human, but he didn't want to impose too often. When Amara emerged with leftovers, she settled beside him on the step. "You carry that everywhere," she observed, nodding toward the wooden box. Henry's hands tightened instinctively. He'd been guarding its contents so long the protective gesture was automatic. "It's all I have left," he said simply. "Of what?" Henry studied her face in dim light. Genuine curiosity, but no pushiness. She'd never pressed for details, just offered kindness without conditions. Maybe that's why he found himself opening the box for the first time in months. "Memories," he said, lifting out a yellowed photograph. "This is Marcus when he was 12, just after he came to live with me." Amara leaned closer. The picture showed a thin black boy with defensive eyes and stubborn jaw, wearing clean but second-hand clothes. "He looks angry." He was. Bounced around foster system 3 years after his mother died. Nobody wanted a kid his age, especially one with attitude. Henry smiled at memory. "First night he tried running away twice. Third time I caught him packing. I asked where he thought he was going. What did he say? That it didn't matter, because wherever it was would be better than staying somewhere he wasn't wanted." Henry's voice grew soft. "Broke my heart, so I sat him at the kitchen table, made hot chocolate, and told him something I'll never forget." "What?" I said, "Son, I've been waiting 47 years for you to come through that door. I've got a room ready, food in the refrigerator, and all the time in the world to learn who you are. The only thing I don't have is somewhere else to go because this is my home, and now it's yours too." Amara felt tears prick her eyes. What did he do? Cried for about an hour. First time since his mama died, according to his caseworker. Then he unpacked and asked for seconds on hot chocolate. Henry showed her more photographs. Marcus at 16 in football uniform, grinning broadly, at high school graduation, at college, at his wedding. "This is from his first city council election," Henry said, unfolding a newspaper clipping. "He was 26, I bought 10 copies. The article was full of Marcus's youth program plans. It mentioned he was raised by a foster parent, but didn't use Henry's name." "Why not?" Amara asked. "Marcus said it was to protect my privacy. Political campaigns can get nasty," but something in his tone suggested he wasn't convinced. "When did you last talk to him?" Henry pulled out a letter on congressional letterhead, 8 years ago, right after he won his seat in Congress. The letter was warm, grateful, full of thanks and promises to stay in touch. It ended with an invitation to visit Washington any time. "Did you ever take him up on that?" "I tried, called his office several times, but could never get past staff. They kept saying he was in meetings, traveling, would call back." Henry's voice grew smaller. "He never did. Maybe he never got the messages." "Maybe," but Henry didn't sound convinced. "After a while, I stopped calling. Figured if he wanted to talk, he knew where to find me." Amara felt anger building. Here was a man who'd devoted years to raising a child who wasn't his, sacrificed his comfort to give that child success. And that child, now a powerful congressman, had apparently forgotten. What's his full name? Marcus Williams. Congressman Marcus Williams, from the 3rd District. Amara knew that name. Everyone did. Marcus Williams was a rising political star, frequently in news for education and social justice work. He gave speeches about helping disadvantaged youth and breaking poverty cycles. The irony was bitter. "Henry, have you considered reaching out again?" "I've thought about it, but I don't want to be a burden or embarrassment. He's got important responsibilities. Last thing he needs is some homeless old man claiming to be his father." "You're not claiming anything. You are his father, in every way that matters." Henry carefully put photographs and letter back in the box. "Blood makes you related, love makes you family. I loved that boy like my own flesh, and I thought," he trailed off, "you thought he loved you the same way." "I did. Maybe he did once. But people change. Success changes people." As they sat in darkness, Amara's mind raced. A plan was forming. Dangerous, probably foolish, but impossible to ignore. "Where are you sleeping tonight?" "My usual place. Come stay with us." Henry looked startled. "I couldn't." "Yes you could. We have a couch, and it's supposed to rain. Zoe already asked why I let you leave yesterday instead of offering a place to stay." "Are you sure it won't cause problems?" "What kind of problems?" "Neighbors, gossip." "Henry, half this town is one paycheck from homelessness. The other half should mind their own business." As they walked toward Seashell Street, Amara found herself thinking about Congressman Marcus Williams, about his speeches helping disadvantaged youth, programs he supported, the image he projected of understanding struggle. Meanwhile, the man who'd actually lived those values was sleeping under a pier, wondering if he'd ever mattered. It was wrong, more than wrong, it was betrayal of everything Marcus claimed to stand for. Maybe it was time someone reminded him of that. Trouble started 3 days after Henry began staying on Amara's couch. Walking to work Monday morning, Amara noticed stairs. Mrs. Peterson, who usually waved from her garden, turned her back when Amara passed. At the grocery store, conversation stopped when she entered aisles, resuming in whispers after she moved on. By Tuesday, whispers had turned to barely concealed comments. "I don't know what that girl is thinking," Mrs. Davidson said to her friend in produce. "Bringing some strange man into her house with her teenage sister there, probably trying to get attention. You know young people, always looking for a cause to feel important." At Miller's diner, atmosphere was tense. Jake had heard gossip too. "You doing okay?" he asked during lunch rush. "Fine," Amara replied, refilling coffee cups with perhaps more force than necessary. "People are talking. People always talk. This is different. They're saying things about you having a strange man in your house." Before Amara could respond, Bobby Martinez walked in. He'd been coming regularly since losing his shipyard job, nursing coffee and scanning newspapers for employment ads that never materialized. Today his usual defeated expression was replaced by something harder. "Morning, Bobby," Amara said, pouring coffee. "The usual. Actually, I wanted to talk about this homeless guy you've got living with you." Amara felt every conversation stop. Other customers were suddenly very interested in their food, but clearly listening. "Henry isn't living with me. He's staying on our couch temporarily." Same difference. "Look, I've got nothing against helping people, but you've got to think about what example you're setting. What message you're sending. What message is that, Bobby? That it's okay to just give up? That society owes you something for nothing?" Bobby's voice got louder. "I've been out of work 8 months, but you don't see me begging for handouts or sleeping on people's couches. Some of us still have pride." The words hit like a physical blow. Amara could see pain behind Bobby's anger, humiliation of unemployment, desperation of watching savings disappear while no one would hire him. "Henry isn't begging for handouts. He's a good man who's fallen on hard times, right? I'm sure he's got a real sob story. They all do. He worked 43 years building ships that kept this town alive. He raised a foster child, who's now a congressman. He's earned some compassion." "A congressman?" Bobby laughed bitterly. "If this guy raised a congressman, why isn't that congressman taking care of him?" Sounds like another lie from another con artist. Mrs. Henderson spoke up from her corner booth. "Bobby Martinez, you ought to be ashamed. Amara's doing a Christian thing. A Christian thing would be helping her own community. There are plenty of local people struggling, who deserve help more than some stranger. Henry is part of our community now," Amara said firmly, "and helping people isn't a limited resource." Bobby threw money on the counter for untouched coffee. "Just remember, some of us have been here our whole lives. Some of us have roots, families, reputations to think about." He left without another word, but his message was clear. That night, lying in bed, listening to Henry settling on the living room couch, Amara's phone buzzed with a text from her friend Jessica in Charlotte. "Girl, what's this about you taking in some random homeless man? My mom called and said the whole town's talking. Are you crazy? You've got Zoe to think about." Amara stared at the message before responding. "He's not random, he's a good person who needs help. I'm sure he seems nice, but you don't really know him. What if he's dangerous? Mental problems, addiction? You're putting yourself and Zoe at risk." "He's not dangerous. How can you be sure? Homelessness isn't normal, Amara. Something happened to put him on the streets." Amara turned off her phone, but Jessica's words echoed. How could she be sure? She'd known Henry less than a month, trusted him based on instinct and conversations. Was that enough? The next morning, she found Henry already awake, sitting on the couch with his wooden box open, staring at photographs inside. "Couldn't sleep," he said when he noticed her watching. "Bad dreams, bad thoughts." Henry carefully closed the box. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about it not being my fault that people are talking. It's not, maybe, but that doesn't change the fact that my being here is causing problems for you and Zoe. What do you want, Henry?" "I want to stop being a burden. I want to stop feeling like a failure. I want to matter to someone again." "You matter to us, for now, but what happens when gossip gets worse? When it starts affecting Zoe at school, your job, your standing in the community?" Amara wanted to tell him that would never happen, that she'd stand by him no matter what. But doubt Jessica's message had planted was still there. "I don't know, but I know turning my back on someone who needs help isn't the answer, even if helping me hurts you." Before Amara could answer, Zoe emerged from her bedroom, dressed for school. "Morning," she said cheerfully, then stopped, seeing their serious expressions. "What's wrong?" "Just discussing current events," Henry said, forcing a smile. After Zoe left, they sat in uncomfortable silence. "I should go," Henry said finally. Go where? Back to the pier. Back to taking care of myself. Before this gets worse. That's not the solution. Isn't it? Look what's happening. You're getting attacked at work, neighbors turning against you, friends questioning your judgment. All because you tried to help an old fool. You're not a fool, and I'm not giving up because some people don't understand kindness. But even as she said it, Amara felt the weight of the town's disapproval pressing down. At work, atmosphere had grown even tenser. Jake barely spoke during the morning rush, and several regular customers found excuses to leave without ordering. At lunch, Mrs. Patterson, Zoe's guidance counselor, came in with a look of concern replacing her usual condescending smile. Amara dear, I was hoping we could have a private conversation about your sister. Amara felt her stomach drop. What about Zoe? There's been talk around school about your living situation. Some parents are concerned about the influences Zoe might be exposed to at home. Influences, the homeless man you've taken in. I'm sure your intentions are good, but you have to understand how this looks. A teenage girl living with an unknown adult male. It raises questions about judgment and supervision. Henry is a good man who's helping Zoe with homework and sharing local history stories. I'm sure that's how you see it, but perception matters. I have to ask, are you prepared to prioritize Zoe's future over your charitable impulses? The question hit like a slap. Amara saw not concern but judgment, not care but condescension. Zoe's future is fine, thank you. And so is my judgment. Is it? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're jeopardizing your reputation, job security, and your sister's social standing for a stranger whose background you know nothing about. I know enough. Do you? Do you know why he's homeless? Mental health issues, addiction, criminal record. Have you done any background check, or are you just trusting instincts with your sister's safety? Each question drove home doubts Amara had been suppressing. She didn't know Henry's full story. She'd trusted him based on gut instinct, but was that enough with Zoe's welfare at stake? I think this conversation is over. I hope so, for everyone's sake, especially Zoe's. Sometimes being a good guardian means making hard choices. After she left, Amara stood alone feeling like walls were closing in. Jake emerged from the kitchen, expression troubled. Maybe you should consider that you've got responsibilities beyond helping strangers. You've got Zoe to think about. I am thinking about Zoe, about the example I want to set. And what kind of person is that? Someone who takes foolish risks, someone who puts idealism ahead of practical concerns. Amara stared at Jake, realizing even he thought she was making a mistake. Someone who helps people when they need help. Someone who doesn't turn their back on others because it's inconvenient. Walking home through streets where neighbors no longer made eye contact, where former friends crossed to avoid her, Amara felt the full weight of her decision's cost. But the sight at home finally broke her heart. Henry was on the front porch with his wooden box and belongings packed in a worn duffel bag. I'm leaving tonight, after Zoe gets home. I want to say goodbye properly. Henry, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I've been listening to talk around town. I know what people are saying. I won't be responsible for destroying your reputation or hurting that girl's future. Where will you go? Back to the pier. I survived before I met you. But you were dying before you met me. Slowly but dying. Henry was quiet, staring at the street where curtains twitched as neighbors watched. Maybe that's what I deserve. What happens to old men who outlive their usefulness? Don't say that. Don't ever say that. Why not, if it's true? Look what helping me has cost. Your friends turning against you, neighbors gossiping, your boss questioning judgment. Even that guidance counselor threatening Zoe's future because of me. Mrs. Patterson is a self-righteous busybody, who has power over Zoe's college applications. Who could make things difficult for a smart girl who deserves every opportunity? Henry faced her fully. I won't be responsible for destroying that girl's chances. And what about what I care about? What I think is right? Sometimes caring about someone means letting them go, even when it breaks your heart. Before Amara could respond, Zoe appeared at the walkway's end, concerned expression taking in Henry's packed bag and porch tension. What's going on? Mr. Henry, are you going somewhere? Henry stood slowly. I'm afraid so, Miss Zoe. Time for me to move on. Move on where? Why? Zoe looked between them, understanding dawning. Is this because of what people are saying? Because of gossip? It's because I don't want to cause more problems for you and your sister. You're not causing problems. Other people are. Zoe's voice rose with indignation. You're the best thing that's happened to this house since Grandma died. You help me with homework, tell amazing stories, make Amara smile for the first time in months. And now you're leaving because some small-minded people can't see past their prejudices. Zoe, Amara said gently. It's more complicated. No, it's not. It's exactly that simple. Zoe turned back to Henry, eyes bright with unshed tears. Please don't go. Please don't let them win. Henry took the girl's hands in his weathered ones. Sweet girl, sometimes the best way to win is knowing when to walk away. I don't want my presence to hurt your future, or damage your sister's reputation. What about your future, your reputation? Don't you deserve better than sleeping under a pier? I deserve whatever life I've earned. And apparently this is what I've earned. That's not true and you know it. You earned better. You earned a foster son who remembers what you did for him. You earned a community that takes care of its elders. You earned respect and dignity and a warm place to sleep. But wanting something and getting it are two different things. Only if you give up. Only if you let other people decide what you deserve. Henry looked at this fierce girl who reminded him of Marcus at that age, full of righteous anger and unwavering certainty about right and wrong. I'll think about what you said, but for tonight, I think it's best if I give everyone space to cool down. And tomorrow we'll see what tomorrow brings. As Henry picked up his bag and walked toward the street, carrying his wooden box and the weight of perceived failures, Amara and Zoe stood watching him go. We can't let him leave, Zoe said quietly. I don't know how to stop him. By fighting harder. By not caring what other people think. And if fighting harder means you don't get into college. If not caring what people think means you lose opportunities you'll never get back. Zoe was quiet, watching Henry's figure disappear around the corner. Grandma used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they do when it's easy. It's what they do when it's hard. Grandma never had to worry about guidance counselors threatening your future. No, but she had to worry about a lot of other things. And she always said the right thing to do was usually the hard thing to do. The announcement came Tuesday morning through local radio, hastily printed flyers and excited chatter Millhaven hadn't experienced in years. Congressman Marcus Williams was coming home. Not just for a brief visit, but for a full-scale campaign event. After 12 years in Washington he was running for U.S. Senate, and Millhaven would host the official launch. Amara heard the news while refilling coffee at Miller's Diner, where the breakfast crowd buzzed with more energy than she'd seen since the shipyard closing. A real congressman, coming here, Mrs. Henderson marveled. My Harold worked with his foster father for years at the docks, said Henry Brooks was the finest man he ever knew. Henry Brooks. Amara's hand stilled on the coffee pot. That's right, raised that boy from when he was just a troublemaker kid, turned him into something special. Mrs. Henderson's eyes grew misty. Harold always said Henry had a gift with people, especially children, could see potential where others saw problems. Bobby Martinez, who'd been pointedly ignoring Amara since their confrontation, suddenly found his voice. That's assuming it's the same guy. Lots of people named Henry Brooks. How many worked Millhaven docks 40 years and raised a foster kid named Marcus? Mrs. Henderson shot back. It's the same man. I'd bet my social security check. Amara excused herself and stepped outside, mind racing. If Mrs. Henderson was right, and the elderly woman had encyclopedic memory for local connections, then Henry's story was about to intersect with reality in the most public way possible. The irony was almost too painful. While Henry slept under a pier, forgotten and dismissed, the man he'd raised was preparing to return as a conquering hero, celebrated for overcoming hardships Henry was currently living. She found Henry that evening at his usual pier spot, huddled against growing cold with his wooden box clutched to his chest. He looked smaller, more fragile, as if the week away from regular meals had aged him years. Henry, she said softly. He looked up, weathered face breaking into a smile despite circumstances. Amara, how are you, my dear? I should be asking you that. Have you been eating? Managing well enough? Found day work helping clean the old church. Pastor Williams paid me in cash and a hot meal. Pastor Williams, any relation to Marcus Williams? Henry's expression shifted, surprise mixing with something that might have been hope. You know about Marcus? I know he's coming back to town. Day after tomorrow for a big campaign event in the town square. Henry was quiet, fingers tracing his wooden box edges. A campaign event, for U.S. Senate. It's all anyone's been talking about. He always was ambitious, even as a boy he dreamed big. Henry's voice carried pride and sadness. I used to tell him the world was his for the taking, if he was willing to work for it. Are you going to the event? I don't think that would be appropriate. Appropriate? Amara couldn't keep frustration from her voice. Henry, you raised him. You're the reason he's successful. If anyone has the right to be there, it's you. That was long ago. He's moved on, built a life, made a name for himself. Last thing he needs is some homeless old man showing up claiming credit. You wouldn't be claiming credit, you'd be, she searched for words. What? A reminder of where he came from. A symbol of poverty and struggle he spent years trying to overcome. Henry shook his head. Politicians need to project success. Having your homeless foster father show up isn't exactly the image they're looking for. Maybe it's exactly the image he needs. Before Henry could respond, they heard footsteps across sand. Amara tensed, ready to help Henry move if needed, but the figure emerging from darkness was Zoe. I thought I might find you here, she said, settling beside them. Mom used to bring me to this pier when I was little. She said it was the best place in town to think. What are you thinking about tonight? Henry asked gently. You. Amara, this whole mess. Zoe pulled her knees to her chest. I've been doing research on Marcus Williams. Did you know he's written a book about overcoming adversity? About the importance of mentorship and father figures in breaking poverty cycles. Henry's laugh was bitter. I imagine he has. He talks about growing up in foster care, about how one person believing in him made all the difference. Gives speeches about it all the time. But he doesn't mention names. No, he doesn't. Which is interesting, because I found old newspaper articles from when he first ran for city council. Back then, he talked about Henry Brooks all the time, called you his hero, his inspiration, said he owed everything to the man who took him in and loved him like a son. Amara felt anger building again. What changed? Politics, Henry said simply. The higher he climbed, the more his past became something to be managed rather than celebrated. I understand it. A successful politician with a heartwarming backstory plays well. A successful politician with a homeless foster father raises uncomfortable questions. What kind of questions? Zoe demanded. Questions about why he's not taking care of the man who raised him. Questions about what kind of person forgets where they came from. Questions that don't have easy answers for campaign soundbites. They sat listening to waves against pier pilings. Finally Zoe spoke again. There's going to be media there. Television cameras, newspaper reporters, probably national coverage since it's a Senate race. I imagine so. What if someone recognized you? What if someone asked about the connection? Henry's grip tightened on his box. I suppose that would be awkward for everyone involved. Awkward? Amara couldn't contain herself. Henry, this is your chance. Your chance to remind him who you are, what you meant to each other. Your chance to what? Embarrass him, damage his campaign, force him into an uncomfortable situation that could hurt his chances. To get what you deserve, recognition, respect, maybe help. And if he doesn't want to give those things, if he sees me as a threat rather than a blessing from his past, what then? The question hung heavy between them. Then at least you'll know where you stand, Zoe said quietly. At least you'll know whether the boy you raised still exists inside the man he became. Henry looked at this fierce young woman, who reminded him of Marcus at that age, full of righteous certainty and unwavering belief in justice. The event is day after tomorrow, Henry asked. 2 o'clock in the town square, Amara confirmed. And you think I should go? I think you should decide what feels right to you. Not what's safe, not what's comfortable, but what's right. Henry opened his wooden box and pulled out the photograph of 12-year-old Marcus, angry and defensive and trying so hard to seem tough. Then the letter Marcus had written 8 years ago, full of gratitude and promises to stay in touch. He was a good boy. Underneath all that anger and pain, he was a good boy who just wanted someone to believe in him. Maybe he still is, Zoe said. Maybe, or maybe that boy died somewhere between the foster home and Congress. Only one way to find out, Amara said. Marcus Williams arrived in Millhaven like a conquering hero returning to claim his throne. The town square, usually empty except for occasional dog walkers, had been transformed overnight. A raised platform dominated the center, draped in red, white and blue bunting and flanked by American flags. Professional lighting cast everything in golden glow that made even Millhaven's weathered buildings look picturesque. By 1:30, nearly 300 people had gathered, more than had assembled for any event in Millhaven's recent memory. Local residents mixed with staffers in crisp suits, reporters with cameras, and what appeared to be supporters bussed in from other districts. Amara stood at the crowd's edge, heart pounding with excitement and terror. She'd spent the morning trying to talk herself out of what she was about to do, but every time doubt crept in, she thought about Henry's weathered hands holding that wooden box. "You sure about this?" Zoe whispered beside her. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." They'd positioned themselves near the front, close enough to see Marcus clearly, close enough to be heard when the moment came. Henry was nowhere to be seen. At exactly 2 o'clock, a black SUV pulled up and Congressman Marcus Williams stepped out. The crowd erupted in applause. Even from distance, the resemblance to Henry's photographs was unmistakable. Marcus had grown into a handsome man in his late 30s, tall and confident, with presence that commanded attention. His smile was warm as he waved, and when he spoke into the microphone, his voice carried easily. "Millhaven," he began, and the crowd cheered. "It's good to be home." He was polished, professional, every inch the successful politician. But as Amara watched him work the crowd, she searched for traces of the 12-year-old boy Henry had described. Angry, defensive, desperate for someone to believe in him. "I stand before you today, not just as your congressman, but as someone who understands what it means to struggle," Marcus continued, voice carrying practiced cadence. "I understand what it means to face obstacles that seem insurmountable, to wonder if you'll ever have a chance at the American dream." The crowd murmured agreement. "I was 12 years old when I came to this community, bouncing through a foster system that had given up on me. I was angry, scared, convinced the world owed me nothing but disappointment." Amara felt Zoe tense beside her. "But this community saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Someone in this community took a chance on a troubled kid, and showed me that with hard work, determination, and the right guidance, anything was possible." "Say his name," Zoe whispered fiercely. "Say Henry's name." But Marcus didn't. He talked about mentorship in general terms, about community support, about how his experiences had shaped his commitment to helping disadvantaged youth. He was passionate, articulate, inspiring, and completely impersonal. "That's why I'm running for the U.S. Senate, because I believe every child deserves the same chance I had. Every community deserves the same investment in its people that Millhaven made in me." The crowd was energized by his vision. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, and Marcus basked in hometown approval. But he still hadn't mentioned Henry's name. "Now I'd like to take a few questions from the community before we move to the reception." Hands shot up throughout the crowd. Marcus pointed to a well-dressed woman, then a reporter, then a local business owner, who asked about tax policy. Amara felt her chance slipping away. In minutes Marcus would wrap up, pose for photos and disappear into whatever comfortable venue his staff had arranged. He'd leave Millhaven the same way he'd arrived, successful, celebrated, and completely disconnected from the man who'd made it all possible. "One more question," Marcus announced, scanning the crowd with his practiced smile. Amara's hand shot up. "Yes, the young lady in the blue jacket." The crowd turned to look at her, and suddenly Amara felt naked in front of hundreds of strangers. Her mouth went dry, heart hammered against her ribs, and for a moment she couldn't remember what she'd planned to say. Then she thought about Henry, alone under the pier, with his memories and dignity intact despite everything the world had taken. "Congressman Williams," she began, voice stronger than expected, "you've talked a lot about the mentorship you received as a child, about someone in this community who took a chance on you. I was wondering if you could tell us that person's name." Marcus's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry, the person who took you in when you were 12. The one who showed you that anything was possible." "What was his name?" A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't the kind of question politicians usually got. Reporters sensed something interesting and moved closer. Well, that's a very personal question, Marcus said, media training kicking in. I prefer to focus on the broader message of community support rather than individual. His name was Henry Brooks. Amara interrupted, words ringing across the square like a bell. Henry Brooks, who worked the Millhaven docks for 43 years. Henry Brooks, who took in an angry 12-year-old foster kid and loved him like a son. Henry Brooks, who sacrificed his own comfort to make sure you had everything you needed to succeed. The crowd's murmur grew louder. People turned to neighbors, whispering, pointing. Several reporters focused entirely on Amara. Marcus's composure slipped further. Yes, Henry Brooks was indeed my foster father, and I'm very grateful for everything he did. But I'm not sure what relevance, Amara said, voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet square, is that Henry Brooks is homeless. Right now, today, while you're standing here talking about community support and helping disadvantaged people, the man who saved your life is sleeping under a pier because he can't afford rent on his pension. The effect was immediate and electric. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs, reporters began shouting questions, and cameras swung toward Amara like weapons. Marcus stood frozen on stage, political mask slipping to reveal something raw and human underneath. Henry Brooks raised you from 12 until you graduated college, Amara continued, riding the wave of attention. He went to every football game, every graduation, every award ceremony. He was so proud that he kept newspaper clippings of all your achievements in a wooden box he carries everywhere. I didn't know, Marcus began, but his voice was barely audible over the chaos. He still has the letter you wrote him 8 years ago, thanking him for everything and promising to stay in touch. He still talks about you like you're the most important thing that ever happened to him. And he's been trying to reach you for years, but your staff won't put his calls through. The crowd was fully engaged now, some shouting questions, others demanding answers. The carefully orchestrated campaign event had devolved into something raw and unpredictable. Where is he? Marcus asked suddenly, voice cutting through noise. Where is Henry? As if summoned by his name, Henry emerged from behind trees at the square's edge. He moved slowly, deliberately, wooden box clutched against his chest. His clothes were clean but worn, posture dignified, despite circumstances. The crowd parted before him like a sea, everyone staring as this elderly black man made his way toward the stage where the congressman stood frozen. Henry stopped at the platform's foot and looked up at Marcus. For a moment the years seemed to fall away. Suddenly they weren't a homeless man and a politician, they were a father and son, separated by time and circumstances and misunderstanding. Hello, son, Henry said softly, but in the sudden silence, his words carried to every corner. Marcus stared down at him, and Amara saw the exact moment when the politician disappeared and the boy emerged. His face crumpled, carefully maintained composure shattered, and he stepped down from the platform without ceremony. Henry, he whispered. God, Henry, I'm so sorry. The embrace that followed was witnessed by 300 people, dozens of cameras, and reporters who understood they were watching something that transcended politics. Marcus wrapped his arms around the man who'd raised him, and Henry held on like he was afraid this moment might disappear. When they finally separated, both had tears on their faces, and the crowd had gone completely silent. I tried to call, Henry said, voice shaking. I tried to reach you, but I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry. Marcus looked around at the crowd, cameras, reporters hanging on every word. Everyone needs to know, this man saved my life. This man is the reason I'm standing here today. This man is my father in every way that matters. He turned back to Henry, voice stronger now, and I failed him. I failed the man who never failed me, not once in all the years he raised me. You haven't failed anyone, Henry said gently. You've become exactly what I always knew you could become. But you're homeless, you're living on the streets while I'm living in comfort, and that's not the man you raised me to be. It's not your fault. Yes, it is. Marcus's voice carried across the square. It is my fault.
because I knew where you were and I let pride and politics and fear keep me from doing what was right. I let my staff talk me out of returning your calls because they said it might be complicated politically speaking. The admission sent another ripple through the crowd. This kind of raw honesty wasn't what people expected from political events. But you know what? Some things are more important than politics. Some things are more important than image management and campaign strategy, and all the careful calculations that politics requires. He took Henry's weathered hands in his own, oblivious to cameras capturing every moment. This man taught me that love isn't conditional on success, that family isn't about blood or convenience, that taking care of each other is what makes us human, and I forgot those lessons somewhere on the way to Congress. The crowd was completely silent now, caught up in a moment none had expected to witness. Henry, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I'm asking for a chance to be the son you raised me to be, instead of the politician I became. Henry smiled through his tears, the same gentle expression Amara had seen when he helped Zoe with homework. Son, you never lost my love and you never will. You're exactly who I raised you to be. You just forgot for a while, but forgetting isn't permanent, unless you let it be. The embrace that followed was even longer than the first, and when they separated, Marcus turned to address the crowd with different energy entirely. Ladies and gentlemen, I came here today to launch a campaign for the U.S. Senate, but I'm suspending that campaign until I've taken care of more important business. Gasps rose from the crowd. His staff members looked panicked. I'm going to make sure this man, my father, has a place to live, healthcare, and everything else he needs for the rest of his life, because that's what family does. That's what community means. And if I can't take care of the one person who mattered most in my life, then I have no business asking you to trust me to take care of an entire state. The crowd erupted in applause, different from the polite campaign applause earlier. This was raw, emotional, spontaneous. 3 days after their public reunion, Henry and Marcus sat in Henry's old kitchen, the same kitchen where Marcus had done homework for 6 years, where they'd shared thousands of meals, where Henry had taught an angry boy how to become a good man. Marcus had arranged for the house to be bought back from the bank within 24 hours, calling in favors and writing checks with urgency of someone trying to repair years of neglect in a single day. You didn't have to do this, Henry said for the third time, running weathered hands over the familiar oak table. A simple apartment would have been fine. This is your home, Marcus replied, unpacking groceries into the same refrigerator that had been nearly empty when the bank took the house. This is where you belong. The kitchen looked exactly as Henry remembered, same yellow walls, same mismatched chairs, same harbor view through the window over the sink. Marcus had even tracked down some of Henry's furniture from the estate sale. I keep thinking this might be a dream, Henry admitted, that I'll wake up under that pier with nothing but memories and regrets. Marcus stopped unpacking and turned to face the man who'd raised him. In the 3 days since the campaign event, they'd spent hours talking, trying to bridge the gap 8 years of silence had created. But there were still things that needed saying, wounds that needed acknowledging before they could truly heal. Henry, I need you to understand something. What happened to you, losing this house, ending up on the streets, that's on me. No son, that's not. Yes it is. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat across from Henry, the same position they'd occupied for countless conversations when Marcus was growing up. I knew you were struggling. My staff knew you'd been calling. I let them convince me that getting involved would be complicated, politically speaking. Henry studied his foster son's face, seeing the guilt and shame Marcus had been carrying since their reunion.
What did they tell you? That taking care of you publicly might raise questions about why I hadn't been doing it all along. That it might make me look bad if people found out I'd been ignoring your calls. Marcus's voice grew bitter. They said it was better to keep my inspiring backstory vague, focus on the message rather than the messy reality of ongoing responsibility. And you listened to them. I listened because it was easier than listening to my conscience, because deep down, I was ashamed. Ashamed of me. Ashamed of where I came from. Ashamed that I'd needed help. Ashamed that acknowledging you meant acknowledging that I hadn't pulled myself up by my bootstraps, that everything I'd achieved was built on the foundation you'd given me. Henry reached across the table and took Marcus's hands in his own, the same gesture he'd used to comfort a frightened boy decades ago. Son, there's no shame in needing help. There's no shame in accepting love. The only shame is in forgetting where that help came from. I didn't forget. I tried to forget, but I couldn't. Every speech I gave about mentorship, every program I supported for disadvantaged youth, every time I talked about the importance of family, I was thinking about you. But I was thinking about you like you were a character in my story instead of a real person who might need my help. The words hung between them, heavy with years of abandonment and neglect. I turned you into a symbol instead of treating you like family. I used your love for me to build my career, but I didn't give anything back. I took the lessons you taught me, and used them to help strangers while ignoring the man who taught them to me. Henry was crying now too, but his tears were mixed with something that looked like relief. Do you know what the hardest part was? It wasn't sleeping under the pier, or going hungry, or being ignored by people on the street. It was wondering if I'd failed you somehow. Wondering if maybe I hadn't done enough, hadn't loved you enough, hadn't prepared you well enough for the world. God, Henry, no, you did everything right, you saved my life in every way that matters. Then why did it feel like I'd lost you? The question broke something open in Marcus, and suddenly he was sobbing like the 12-year-old boy he'd been when Henry first took him in. All the controlled politician's composure disappeared, replaced by raw grief for the relationship he'd nearly destroyed. Because I was a coward, because I was so afraid of being seen as weak or needy that I convinced myself I didn't need anyone. Because I let success make me forget that strength comes from connection, not independence. Henry stood and moved around the table, pulling Marcus into the same kind of embrace that had comforted him through nightmares and disappointments when he was young. It's okay, son. It's okay. You remembered what mattered when it counted. You chose love over politics when the choice was clear. But what if Amara hadn't spoken up? What if you died on the streets while I was giving speeches about helping people? But you did get the chance, and you took it. That's what matters now. They held each other in the kitchen where their relationship had been built, two men reclaiming a bond that distance and pride had threatened to break forever. When they finally separated, Henry wiped his eyes and smiled. Besides, I had help remembering what kind of man I raised you to be. That girl, Amara, she saw something in you that you'd forgotten about yourself. She saw the truth. She saw that I was betraying everything you taught me. She saw that you were capable of being better. And she was right. Marcus nodded, then pulled out his phone and scrolled through contacts. What are you doing? Calling my campaign manager to tell him I'm withdrawing from the Senate race. Marcus, no. Henry's voice was firm. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. I promised publicly that I was suspending the campaign, and I meant it. Some things are more important than politics. Like what? Like rebuilding our relationship. Like making sure you have everything you need. Like figuring out how to be the man you raised me to be instead of the politician I became. Henry was quiet for a moment, studying his foster son's face. Son, what did I teach you about helping people? That it's not about grand gestures or dramatic announcements. It's about showing up, day after day, and doing what needs to be done. And what did I teach you about using your talents? That God gives you gifts so you can use them to help others. And what did I teach you about responsibility? Marcus smiled through his tears. That having power means using it to make things better for people who don't have power. So tell me, son, how does withdrawing from the Senate race honor those lessons? Marcus stared at Henry for a long moment, understanding beginning to dawn. You think I should stay in the race. I think you should do whatever you think is right, but I also think you can take care of me and serve the people of this state at the same time. In fact, I think taking care of me might make you a better senator. How? Because it'll remind you where you came from. Because it'll keep you connected to the kind of people who need advocates in Washington. Because it'll make sure you never forget that behind every policy and program and political position, there are real people whose lives hang in the balance. Marcus considered this, then laughed, the first truly joyful sound he'd made since their reunion. You're still teaching me, aren't you? I'm still learning too. Amara and Zoe taught me something important this week. What's that? That family isn't just about the people related to you. It's about the people who choose to love you when you need it most. Henry's eyes grew distant. Those girls didn't owe me anything, but they fought for me anyway. They reminded me that there's still kindness in the world, still people willing to stand up for what's right. They reminded me of the same thing. Amara risked everything to call me out in front of that crowd. She could have been wrong, could have been humiliated, could have made things worse, but she did it anyway because she believed it was right. Sounds like someone I used to know, Henry said with a meaningful look. Who? A boy who used to stand up to bullies even when outnumbered. A teenager who organized protests when the school tried to cut special education funding. A young man who chose to run for office because he thought he could make a difference, even though everyone said he was too young and inexperienced. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a reconnection to the idealism and passion that had driven him into politics in the first place. I forgot who I was. You didn't forget, you just got distracted by all the noise and compromise that politics requires. But that boy is still in there, son. Amara just reminded him to wake up. As the afternoon wore on, they talked about everything. Marcus's work in Congress, Henry's years of struggle, their shared memories of better times. But mostly they talked about the future. I want to restart the Senate campaign, Marcus said eventually. But I want to do it differently this time. How so? I want to run on truth instead of image management. I want to talk about real problems and real solutions, even when they're complicated or uncomfortable. I want to remember that every policy I support or oppose affects real people like you, like Amara, like everyone in Millhaven who's been forgotten by the system. That sounds like the kind of campaign that boy I raised would run. I hope so. I want to make you proud. Henry smiled and reached over to pat Marcus's hand. Son, I've been proud of you since the day you decided to trust me with your pain. Everything else has just been bonus. 6 months later, Marcus Williams won the U.S. Senate race by the largest margin in the state's recent history. But more importantly, Millhaven was alive again. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Real change never did. But slowly, systematically, with the determination of a man who'd learned the difference between political promises and personal commitment, Marcus had begun to fulfill the vision he'd articulated in that emotional moment in the town square. The first initiative had been immediate and personal, comprehensive healthcare for Henry that addressed not just his lung condition but decades of deferred medical care. Within a week of their reunion, Henry was breathing easier than he had in years. The second had been practical and urgent, an emergency fund for Millhaven's most vulnerable residents. Mrs. Henderson got the apartment she needed. Families living in cars got temporary housing. The program wasn't charity, it was structured as community investment, with recipients contributing through work programs or volunteer services. The third had been visionary and ambitious, a comprehensive economic development plan that honored Millhaven's maritime heritage while preparing it for a modern economy. The key, Marcus explained to the packed auditorium at the town's new community center, is understanding that economic development isn't just about bringing in outside businesses, it's about recognizing and supporting the resources we already have. From her seat in the front row, Amara watched Marcus work the crowd with natural charisma, but there was something different now, something more authentic, more connected to the people he was addressing. Beside her, Henry beamed with pride that no longer had to be hidden or managed for political convenience. He'd become a fixture at Marcus's campaign events, not as a prop but as a genuine partner in the work of rebuilding their community. Take our shipbuilding industry, Marcus continued. We spent decades perfecting the art of building vessels that could weather any storm. That expertise doesn't disappear just because the big contracts went elsewhere. We're partnering with marine engineering programs at 3 universities to establish a boat-building school right here in Millhaven. The applause was enthusiastic, but Amara noticed something that impressed her more. Marcus had done his homework. He understood the technical details, the economic projections, the regulatory challenges. This wasn't a politician making promises he hoped someone else would figure out how to keep. We're also launching a downtown revitalization program that recognizes that economic growth has to serve the people who already live here, not just attract newcomers who might price out longtime residents. Marcus continued, every new business will partner with existing community members. Every development project will include affordable housing. After the presentation, as people mingled and asked questions, Amara found herself in conversation with Sarah Chen, the Washington Post reporter who'd been following the Millhaven story since that dramatic day in the town square. "It's remarkable what's happened here in 6 months," Sarah observed. "But is this sustainable? Can Marcus maintain this level of personal investment in one community while serving an entire state in the Senate?" "I think he's learned something about leadership that maybe he didn't understand before," Amara said, watching Marcus help Henry navigate through the crowd. "Real leadership isn't about managing your image or calculating political advantage. It's about understanding that every policy decision affects real people, and those people deserve your best effort. And you think this experience has changed how he'll approach his Senate work?" "I think it's reminded him why he went into politics in the first place." Across the room, Zoe was deep in conversation with Dr. Patricia Morrison, the dean of the State University's business school. The transformation in Amara's sister over the past 6 months had been remarkable to watch. The anger and cynicism that had defined her teenage years had been replaced by focused determination and genuine optimism. Zoe had spent the summer working with Marcus's team on economic development initiatives, contributing ideas that had shaped several programs now being implemented. Her senior project on sustainable tourism development had been adopted as the framework for Millhaven's new visitor initiatives. "Amara," she turned to find Jake approaching, grinning widely. The transformation at Miller's Diner had been dramatic. What had once been a struggling restaurant was now a thriving community hub that regularly hosted town meetings and business planning sessions. "Did you hear about the harbor restoration grant?" Jake asked excitedly. $2.5 million to clean up the waterfront and rebuild the pier. Should be approved within the month. "That's amazing, Jake. 6 months ago this place was dying. Now we've got new businesses opening, families moving back, young people staying instead of leaving." The whole town remembered how to hope again. As the evening wound down, Amara found herself walking home with Henry and Marcus, moving slowly through streets that buzzed with energy Millhaven hadn't felt in years. "I've been thinking about Mrs. Patterson," Henry said as they paused at the corner of Seashell Street. "That guidance counselor who gave you trouble. What about her? I heard she's been telling people she always believed in Zoe's potential, that she was instrumental in helping her get that scholarship." Amara felt her old anger flare. She did everything she could to discourage Zoe from even applying to college. "I know, but I've been thinking about what you taught me when you first brought me dinner behind the diner." "What did I teach you?" "That sometimes people are limited by their own experiences, their own fears." Mrs. Patterson probably genuinely believed she was protecting Zoe from disappointment. "She's lived in a world where kids from Millhaven don't get opportunities like this." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Henry's right. I spent years surrounded by people who thought like that, staff members who told me it was better to manage expectations than to take risks. They weren't malicious, they were just scared." "So what are you suggesting?" Amara asked. "That maybe Mrs. Patterson deserves the same kind of second chance that Marcus got. The same kind of grace that you showed me when you decided to help a homeless stranger." The idea of extending forgiveness to someone who'd tried to limit Zoe's dreams was difficult, but Amara could see the wisdom in Henry's words. "Besides," Marcus added with a smile, "if Mrs. Patterson wants to take credit for Zoe's success, let her. Maybe it'll inspire her to actually support the next kid who walks into her office with big dreams." At the Lewis house, they found Zoe on the front porch with her laptop, working despite having already been accepted to the state university. "What are you working on?" Amara asked. "Transfer applications. I want to do my freshman year here, get involved with the community development projects, really understand how change happens at the local level. But I'm also applying to policy programs for my junior and senior years." "Policy programs." "I want to study how places like Millhaven can be replicated, how communities can organize themselves to demand better, to create opportunities instead of waiting for them." Zoe looked up with a grin. "Someone has to make sure senators like Marcus remember where they came from." Marcus laughed. "I think I'm going to have my hands full with the Lewis women keeping me honest." "Good," Henry said firmly. "That's exactly what you need." As Marcus said his goodbyes and headed back to his restored house, now serving as both home and informal community center, Amara and Henry settled into their usual spots on the porch.
The wooden box sat between them, no longer a painful reminder of abandonment, but a treasured collection of memories connecting past achievements to present possibilities. "Are you happy?" Amara asked Henry. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it. I'm grateful, I'm hopeful, I'm useful again." He paused, looking out over the harbor where lights from new businesses reflected on water cleaner than it had been in decades. "But mostly I'm proud. Of Marcus of course, but also of you, of Zoe, of this whole community that decided to fight for something better instead of accepting decline as inevitable." Amara followed his gaze toward the harbor, thinking about the journey that had brought them all to this moment. 6 months ago she'd been a waitress in a dying town, focused on survival rather than dreams. Now she was the coordinator of Millhaven's Community Development Initiative, a position Marcus had created specifically for her. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't given you that first meal?" she asked. "Every day, but not with regret, with gratitude that I lived long enough to learn that kindness is never wasted, even when it seems like it might be." "What do you mean?" "I mean that every act of compassion creates ripples. You helped me, which led to Zoe meeting me, which led to both of you deciding to confront Marcus, which led to him remembering who he really was, which led to all of this." Henry gestured toward the revitalized town around them. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't decided to share your leftover meatloaf with a hungry old man, or if Marcus hadn't been raised by someone who taught him the right values in the first place, or if Zoe hadn't inherited her grandmother's stubborn determination to fight for what's right." They sat in comfortable silence watching the harbor settle into evening calm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a Senate campaign to continue, development projects to implement, a community to nurture through the difficult work of sustained change. But tonight they were simply two people who'd learned that hope was not a luxury that only some could afford, but a necessity that everyone deserved. They'd learned that change was possible when people chose courage over comfort, when they decided to fight for each other instead of just themselves. Most importantly, they'd learned that family wasn't just about blood or law or circumstance. It was about choosing to love each other through difficulties, about showing up when showing up was hard, about believing in possibilities even when evidence suggested impossibility. The wooden box sat between them, no longer heavy with regret, but light with promise. Inside were photographs of a boy becoming a man, documents chronicling a life well lived, and memories that connected generations of love and sacrifice and hope. But the real treasure wasn't in the box, it was in the connections they'd built, the community they'd helped revive, and the knowledge that sometimes, just sometimes, the right choice made at the right moment could change everything.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.